Hello and welcome to our session, Get Off the Roller Coaster, Better Websites Through Incremental Change. My name is Ben Cash. I'm the CEO at Reason One, a digital agency focused on the health sector.
And my name is Steve Barry. I'm a product owner at Lee Health in Southwest Florida, and I've been working closely with Ben and his team for the past 4 years in all the development efforts with our public-facing website, leehealth.org.
Excellent. So this is Steve and I on our way to Vegas, if you get the reference. This is from the movie Swingers. We actually originally gave this presentation in Vegas at the annual HMPS conference and decided to record it as a standalone webinar. So, and as you can't tell, Steve and I are movie nerds, so we thought we'd have a little fun and use some movie references throughout to drive our points home. So if you want to play along, jot down the name of the movie references that you see throughout. All right, so let's get started. So I don't want to bury the lead here, but y'all are in a tough spot. Consumerization, regulatory constraints, huge technology shifts, shrinking resources and budgets, and oh, by the way, you're also now recruiters. Sadly, it is not a movie. And we've worked with Steve and his team at Lee Health for about 5 years now, and have had a front row seat to them pretty much crushing it. Which is especially Oscar-worthy given the change that we've all been through. So I asked Steve to drive all night to Vegas with me to share his story in the hopes that everybody here could learn something from it. So I'm going to set the stage a bit and then hand it over to Steve to share his journey, some insights and a few case studies. And I'm also going to jump in here and there to share a few best practices. So let's dive in. So for a lot of organizations, especially health systems, managing websites can look something like this, right? The old roller coaster. We have a website that's out of date. You know it. Your leadership knows it. Your users certainly know it, right? And you got to do something about it. So you budget for a big redesign, get that capital budget, dedicate your team for the next 9, 12 months, and you crank it out, right? Big project, happy launch, pop the champagne, and then everybody gets back to their day jobs, and inevitably over the next 3 to 4 years, the slow decline happens again, right? So why does this make us sick? Well, it's certainly more expensive. It can be disruptive to teams. And pretty soon after the decline, it's a bad user experience, gets out of date, which leads to less than ideal outcomes. So Lee Health wasn't immune to this roller coaster either. As you can see here in the Wayback Machine, circa 2011, their website really didn't change much over the course of the next 5 years, right? And then in 2017, boom, they burned it all down and redesigned a completely new website. And again in 2020, right? No shame. Look, we've all ridden the roller coaster. I'm raising my hand here. I'm sure if you're listening to this, you're like, yep, ridden the roller coaster. So there's a better way to do it, we believe. And actually, that last redesign you saw in 2020 was done by our team, and it's when also Steve joined Lee Health. So we had an opportunity together to develop a better way to manage their website. One built on continuous improvement and incremental change. So instead of a revolution every few years, we had an evolution every quarter. And case in point, if I were to advance again in that Wayback Machine up to 2022, you might think we rode the roller coaster again. However, this was actually the same website where we were able to do a design refresh at literally a fraction of the time and expense. So did that approach we took, translate to results? Let's take a look. So we launched the website, as I said, at the beginning of 2020. Pivotal time for digital experiences, right? But even during a global pandemic, if you launch a new site the right way, you can generally expect a typical bump in year one, which is what happened for Lee Health. What you might not expect is that in years 3 and 4, when most sites are at the bottom of the roller coaster, Lee Health's results accelerated. So, Steve, tell us how you did it.
Sure. So how did we do it? Well, we identified 4 key ingredients for success. First one being accountability. Who owns the website? Who's accountable for outcomes? Who's responsible for the end user experience? 2, foundation. Do we have a solid foundation that will scale? 3, process. Do we have processes in place for continuous improvement? And then 4, future planning. Do we know where we're going, and do we have a roadmap to get there?
So in working with a number of health systems over the years, I've gotten a bird's eye view of how different organizations and teams operate. And the most successful organizations, in my opinion, are the ones who have clear roles and responsibilities, most importantly, accountability across teams and departments. And not to play favorites, but I'm going to play favorite Steve. Steve and his specific role as product owner have made the biggest difference we've experienced in driving results and improving collaboration.
So what does a product owner do? Well, we came up with these memes here to try to communicate that. Starting the first one, my friends have no idea what I do. So, but they do know that I love a good social hour. I'm certainly no Steve Jobs, but parents always think we're changing the world. Industry sees us leading the charge, and every time I bring something to Ben's team, it often starts with, I just presented to this group or talked to this person, and now we need to do so and so. So I'm pretty sure that they just think that I just present all the time. Sometimes I feel like Superman trying to hold things together, but what I really do is wear a lot of hats. And one of those hats is ensuring that the user experience, business requirements, and technology all align. But it's not the biggest hat. The most important one is making sure we're building a product and features that connects with consumers. Everything else doesn't matter if our users aren't using it. This is a funny meme that I'm sure applies across many industries. As a product lead, it's our job to define the product strategy, but that can get thrown out the window for whatever the CEO says. And fortunately, that's not the case here at Lee Health. I have not encountered that. But being a health system, we have a lot of stakeholders, many of which are people in positions of authority. And as I've learned over the years, many of them have strong opinions about the website, but they aren't deep in the trenches, seeing all the user feedback, the data, understand the complexities and the effects decisions can have on the website. So it's our job first to listen and emphasize what their needs, build trust with them, and help them see the full picture so the right decisions can be made for their product and then ultimately the end users. Now, I'm technically on the marketing team, but I also work very closely with our IS department. And going back to our movie theme, I'm going to make a super cheesy analogy here.
Here it comes.
Think of them like Batman and Superman. Same goals, but different backgrounds, speaking different languages, but they sometimes clash. And then there's me in the middle. And I really tried to think of a better DC character than this, but you can't argue with the Trinity, so I guess that makes me Wonder Woman.
Nice.
So,
Nice.
first, I hit them with my lasso of truth. No, I'm just kidding. It's understanding both sides, speaking both languages, and building trust between them. And just like our superheroes who work together in the service of mankind, we're working together in service of the end user. So bringing that all together with our handy trustometer here, we're building trust by reducing friction and understanding needs. And to put it more eloquently, I saw this quote recently that I think really encapsulates it. We lead not through authority, but through empathy and building trust with our stakeholders, our teams, and our users.
I like that quote.
Me too. So that brings us to our second key ingredient, building a solid foundation that's flexible and scales. And the first thing I want to do is highlight the wrong approach. I've had a lot of conversations with Ben over the years about different things, but this is the one thing he said to me that really stuck with me. Perfect is the enemy of good and done. This resonated with me because I tend to be a bit of a perfectionist. This can't get in the way of delivering improvements. These projects are too large, too complex, with too many moving pieces to achieve perfection on first try. You'll never get it launched. So especially with a new build, we shouldn't be focused on building the perfect site. We should be focused on building a solid foundation that's flexible and scales. So what do I mean by foundation specifically? Well, first, starts with the right team, but we'll touch on that later. For the actual site and what we launched with, it starts with these: content models, taxonomy, SEO, accessibility, analytics, search, CMS. These are all basic fundamental building blocks of a website, right? But the point I want to get across is this: each of these need to be carefully thought out and planned. You really need to understand the needs of your organization so you can understand what your needs are in each of these areas. The details matter, and it's a lot more connected than you might think. Now, we've adapted and improved each of these as needs have changed and gaps were identified, and I'll use content models as an example. We learned pretty quickly with some of our key pillar content that not only did our models need tweaking, but we also needed a more efficient means of delivering content to them, which I will highlight later in the presentation. And then we have a few more that we learned we needed and now planning for. A digital asset manager to keep our assets organized, a long-term roadmap, which we'll talk about later. And last but certainly not least, we learned an important lesson about the need for a design system during design refresh last year. So a couple years ago, our marketing team rolled out new branding guidelines, so naturally the website needed to reflect those. As you can see here, these before and after shots of our homepage, it's a completely different look, right? And we got the refresh done, but it was a little painful and didn't come without lessons learned. The problem is the design elements in a site are all interconnected. You tweak them in one place and you're going to break them in another, and that's not always obvious at first when you have thousands of pages on your website. There's just inconsistencies between old and new elements and components clashing, font sizes, spacing, alignments, squared versus rounded edges. The list just goes on and on. Just creates all this extra work to fix all the issues, and it makes it just much more difficult to make wholesale site-wide changes at once. Now, fortunately, there is a solution to this, which I alluded to before, and I think Ben is going to tell us a little bit about that now. Ben?
Awesome. Thanks, Steve.
Yep.
So part of our digital roadmap with Steve and his team is to build a design system, which hopefully will address those challenges so that their brand scales consistently as they grow. We want to take some hats off for you, Steve.
One less to wear.
Yeah. So at a minimum, a design system can be a simple library of UX and UI standards like you see here, right? You've got styles such as color, typography, spacing, icons, even motion. And then you start with your sort of basic elements of components, those buttons or CTAs, combined with other elements makes patterns, which turns into features and then layouts, right? It's sort of an atomic approach. And in this one we built for Prisma Health, we went a step further to include code alongside the design components to make it easier for their internal dev team to implement. And actually, this is a great way, we discovered, to maintain web accessibility, as you only have to enforce compliance once.
I love this. Definitely need that, Ben.
It's coming soon. It's coming soon, Steve, I promise. And at their most comprehensive, design system like this one here, Adobe's Spectrum design system, help connect your standards and practices to your overall digital strategy and even your value proposition. You can actually Google Adobe Spectrum design system and browse this. It's public on the website, their website. So these more comprehensive design systems incorporate governance, right? In other words, the why and how we employ a design system in the first place. So when you have more cooks in the kitchen, i.e. different people with unique motivations, needs, and opinions, which, we're humans, it's going to vary. When you have those kind of people, brand standards tend to unravel. It's natural. And since teams don't share a hive mind, we need a single source of truth for the things that we build together. So ultimately, our goal is to improve collaboration for Steve and his team and make for a more consistent user experience, one that's got a lot less friction. So let's take a look at our third key ingredient, process. I'm sure all of you have been involved in any kind of strategic process, have, set goals and KPIs, right? That's typically the easy part. Hell, I'm sure ChatGPT could spit some of those things out for you right now with very little effort. But what's not easy is the how, right? That pesky doing part. Executing consistently despite all the change constraints around you. So with that in mind, we really need to set up a simple, repeatable process for Lee Health. So what we do for them every quarter is we audit, strategize, prioritize, and execute, all within that continuous improvement loop. So with auditing, we're looking for insights across analytics, heat mapping, feedback, and other data sources. This could be addressing or assessing the performance of recent projects, critical features, ongoing initiatives, or maybe even some trends that we're seeing. And what you see on the screen here is a review of a recent landing page project, which Steve will speak to later in the presentation. Next, we strategize with Steve on what observations and insights could turn into a test or maybe a small project, and one that's achievable when they're SLA, right? We got to work within those constraints, within their ongoing budget. We don't want to bite off more than we can chew, or frankly can afford. And some of these things are ones that we would use to address gaps or weaknesses, and also align with the overall digital strategy, ones that ladder up. And the one you see on the screen here is an example of a conversion rate optimization test that we performed on button colors for their wait times and giving calls to action. It's pretty simple, but sometimes the simplest tests can yield the biggest results. So then we map out the projects with regard to timing, estimates, and any dependencies. And most importantly, we prioritize. This is because things change, right? They might take longer than anticipated, or marketing or IS makes an unexpected request. Steve, I'm sure you've never gotten an unexpected ask from IT. So in other words, this is a plan, not the plan. But anything that's important and doesn't make the cut can get added to our backlog, right? That urgent, or not as urgent, but important. So lastly, we execute, right? We keep an eye on progress and we pivot as needed. Because as Steve said, perfection is not our goal. It's about making consistent progress. So as you can see in the highlight reel that we got here, we've employed that process over countless continuous improvement projects over the past few years. Everything from a design refresh to optimization to enhancements and beyond. So I'm going to hand it back over to Steve to walk us through a few of these projects. Steve?
All right, thanks, Ben. So we're going to start with our Golisano Children's Hospital project. I think it's a great example of how we were able to right some wrongs, make some significant improvements, and do it without a huge budget. So this was the problem. In 2022, we had a big marketing initiative for children's services that really put the spotlight on our children's hospital web pages. We had a locations detail page that lacked the wow factor and information about its services and benefits. And we had a landing page that lacked quick reference information. The real problem showed in the data. People were only finding the one that ranked higher in Google, but not really the other one. And we really struggled to find internal navigation paths that worked for both. There was just this huge disconnect. And then on top of all that, our PFAC Council and Golisano leadership weren't happy, and they had every right to be frustrated. They had very legitimate complaints. We definitely had some tough conversations at the outset. And what they really wanted and pushed hard for was a new standalone website. And what, I thought that made a lot of sense, and it's probably even ideal. However, the costs were high, it wasn't budgeted for, and we didn't have the team bandwidth to properly maintain a whole new website, let alone build one. So I put on my problem solving hat and I came up with an alternative solution. A faux microsite, a page that feels more like its own site with its own sub-navigation that consolidated our two problem pages into a more engaging, user-friendly digital front door for Golisano. Fixed our user experience issues, streamlined our customer journeys, and solved our problem with Google.
Woohoo.
So instead of a 12 to 18 months new site build project that would have required us pulling in resources from across the health system, we were able to work solely with Ben's team on the project and complete it within 3 months. Led to a 10% increase of traffic, huge cost savings, and perhaps most importantly, a happy PFAC council.
Yay.
Our next project, our urgent care self-scheduling project. Now, this is an example of an even smaller lift for an even bigger impact. So in 2022, we introduced this wait estimates button in our global site header, and let's take a look and see what happens when you click on the urgent care button. Takes you to our Find Urgent Care page where users can see the estimated wait times for all 4 of our immediate care centers. It allows them to scout out the best option for them, whether that's the location that's closest to them or the shortest wait time or combination of the two. And then right from the widget, patients can schedule ahead for a same-day visit so they don't have to walk in and sit in the waiting room exposing themselves to other people's symptoms. And we started seeing results, almost immediately. As we can see in this graph, it led to an influx of net new urgent care appointments via the website, as you can see from the purple line. And this on my way functionality is also available from within users' MyChart accounts, represented by the green line. We clearly see 2 big spikes in the winter months with net new appointments overtaking MyChart appointments, and then a big dip in the summertime where more appointments are scheduled via MyChart. Now we're very seasonal in Southwest Florida, so we believe this can be explained by our snowbirds having their care managed back home. When they're in town, they're just looking for a convenient way to address their symptoms, and having this on the website really caters to those individuals. Then the summer months, the opposite is true. Our locals are much more inclined to have their care managed by us at Lee Health, so we see more appointments scheduled through their MyChart accounts.
Sounds like those snowbirds get that consumer behavior.
Exactly. Now, earlier I said this project was an example of a small lift for a big impact, and we were able to implement this within a month with minimal involvement from Ben's dev team. And this resulted in an over 100% increase in urgent care appointments scheduled through MyChart's On My Way functionality, which comes out to roughly $2.5 million in net new urgent care revenue. And it's pretty hard to beat that.
Amen.
So our next project, expanding care options, and just a little background on this one. A common complaint that we had, people would come to our site with a specific symptom or condition and they didn't know where to go. So we had a page on the website to address it, but felt like it really lacked proper care guidance. So I had this improvement project in the back of my mind for a while. Been sitting in our backlog when IS came along with a request, and no, it wasn't for a long weekend of knocking out TPS reports. For those of you who get the movie reference, they came to me with a request to add this new symptom checker and virtual care technology that they had partnered with a vendor on. And all they asked for was a page to embed the symptom checker on and a link to this new e-visit platform. And that sounds pretty simple, right? I could have knocked that out myself in 30 minutes. But it wasn't that simple. One of the biggest lessons I've learned is you can't always take requests at face value. You have to break them down to the objective. The objective here was to guide users to the appropriate care options based on their symptom or condition. Really, creating a page and posting a link to it wasn't going to achieve that, at least not well, without mapping out the customer journeys and building out the appropriate context to support it. So I took this request and I married it with that project that was sitting in the back of my mind in our backlog. And what that resulted in was our new Get Care section, a landing page that clearly defines our care options, paired with a common symptom guide that serves as a gateway into our interactive symptom checker. Now let's see how that works in conjunction with our e-visits. So the user chooses their symptom or condition from a deeper list of options, and then it provides them a list of care options and gives them a recommended approach based on that particular condition. In this case, we selected e-visits, and it's going to walk them through some questions to gather additional information about their issue. And then they'll provide their history, add some photos, select their pharmacy, and then submit it for provider review, who will assess everything and provide them back with a care plan in a timely manner. So it's a super convenient process for both the patient and the provider. And that really showed in the stats. We've built trust with our patients as reflected in the patient satisfaction score. We've saved them money, and we've created a better experience for our providers by cutting down their time spent per patient. It's been a win-win for everyone, but we're just getting started. It's only phase one of this project. We're currently right in the middle of that continuous improvement process that Ben described earlier. And so even with success, the work is never done. And then last but not least, our provider source of truth project. And this one is very near and dear to my heart. It's a dragon I've been trying to slay for years. So earlier in the foundation piece, I mentioned how important it is to have an efficient means of delivering content to key pillars of our site, and specifically doctors and locations. And that's exactly what this project was intended to tackle. So find a doctor. It's a critical piece of every health system website, but the provider data is so complex and silo that it's a major challenge to maintain growing roster of provider profiles on the website. I can imagine some of you watching this can relate. So first, let me start with where we've been. Rewinding back to my first week at Lee Health, the site was 3 months away from launch, and Ben's team had built in this cool data importer into the back end of the website. And the idea was that we would take a database export from our credentialing system and drop it right into the website, and then boom, magic, we would have providers and locations. It wasn't magical, because the first time I opened up those database tables, I think I put my head in my hands and my heart sank, and it was just a big mess. And figured out that key pieces of the data were not in a usable state for the website, which just created a giant mess. And tried everything I could at the time to salvage it. But with the launch approaching, we had to pivot to a manual process. And what you see on the screen here is a visual representation of how that process looks today for adding a new provider. As you can see, much like those tables way back when, it's very messy. I'm not going to bore you with all the steps walking you through this, but the one thing I really want to point out is the dotted arrow lines. Each one of those represents a manual process and also an opportunity for something to go wrong, which it oftentimes does. Now, that's only part of it. The other part is maintaining profiles, and I'm not really even sure this is a actual process. It's really 8 or 9 different touch points that we're relying on to notify us that something needs updating. And sometimes things slip between the cracks. So that requires us to have to do regular audits, to make sure that we're not missing anything. So a lot more manual work. Now imagine that process as we've doubled providers over the years. It doesn't scale, and it has several major points of failure. It's human error is inevitable, and it just creates more work for all those involved. It's impacting multiple departments. There's often missing and incorrect information on the website, and it just results in this inconsistent patient experience across consumer touch points. Certainly not ideal, but for the better part of a year now, we have been working on a solution, which is our source of truth database that we plan to directly integrate with the website to automate our provider profiles. So by streamlining our processes upstream, we're eliminating all of those inefficiencies downstream. We're synergizing provider and location data across systems, feeding all that information to our central database and syncing the website with it. And downstream, we're reducing all that manual work and those points of failure down to one manual task, managing the provider BIOS. So as a result, we are building trust with our teams by eliminating 12 manual tasks and points of failure and saving an average of 40 hours per week of various team resources so they can focus on more value-adding activities. And then, of course, having real-time accurate information on the website that our community can count on is obviously very important too.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. And every time I see that, those 40 hours, I think that's a full-time person. That's not a small number.
It really is. All right, so that's a look at where we've been and the kind of projects and outcomes that came about through our quarterly and annual planning. And sometimes the world changes around us faster, though, and we need to make a larger shift to stay ahead. And one of those things that requires one of those things for us that requires future planning is our approach to tech. And I'm going to hand it back over to you, Ben, to talk about the shift of this, as it's something we've been planning with your team.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. It's an
Yep.
impressive roadmap there. So let's start by looking at lehealth.org's current tech stack. So when we built the site in 2019, almost all the features and functions, such as content management, search, forms, providers, and locations, were all custom built in an all-in-one digital experience platform, that DXP that we always hear about. And from Sitecore to Drupal to Kentico or other platforms, this all-in-one approach is pretty common. One platform to handle their website. You got only one platform to manage. And many health systems' needs and environment are unique, and it makes sense to maximize the platform you've invested in and tailor it to your needs. And in Lee Health's case, the approach allowed us to evolve the site at a pretty good pace. As Steve said, though, the pace of change is picking up, and we're in a very different place than we were 5 years ago. Stricter compliance and regulations, competition from everywhere, evolving consumer expectations. And it's not to say, again, that the all-in-one approach isn't viable. It's just that we need an even more flexible and adaptable approach if we're going to keep up. And so I want to lay out some of the principles and approaches that we're road mapping for Lee Health, and that you should consider as well, or at a minimum, be aware of. So the first concept is composability. You probably heard about it, and a number of you are probably already employing it. The all-in-one approach you see on the left there, that's that a single platform can handle the majority of your needs. Whereas with the composable on the right, you compose the digital experience using a number of different tools and platforms. So with the all-in-one, if you replace something, there is a chance, depending on what it is, that you may have to burn the whole thing down. Look, and even if you can change something, you're really paying for it twice. Whereas with composable, if that one thing doesn't work for you anymore, you can swap it out with a new tool. More flexible and lets you change at your own pace. And there are a lot more tools and platforms than there were even a few years ago. So with more expensive all-in-one platforms, you're often paying for functionality that you really don't need. And I like to think of this as the Liberty Mutual slogan, only pay for what you need. Sorry, you have the lasso of truth, Steve. I have Limu Emo, so we'll duke it out.
You might have me beat, man.
Maybe. So, well, while the all-in-one approach is still viable, like I said, and appropriate in some cases, in others, it can be more expensive and time-consuming to adapt, which in turn can create complacency and stagnation, which might make that roller coaster all the more inevitable. And there are also a number of custom proprietary CMS built by service-based companies instead of software manufacturers, right? And proprietary CMS, they're often industry-specific, which can be good, but their compatibility, extensibility, and sometimes their long-term roadmaps will impact your flexibility and adaptability. So in the long term, I've seen a number of organizations, especially health systems, get trapped in an aging platform. You got to watch for that. It's my PSA for the day. Beware of the platform prison. The more you know. Coming across the screen there. Just imagine that. Anyway, So I'm going to up the geek level a little bit here for some fun stuff. This is a time where you might want to pause, use the restroom, top off your coffee, or check your email. And if you like the geek, stick around. So, how many of you have heard of Headless, right? Probably a lot of you. I'll just want to explain some of the basic concepts here just to set the ground floor. So a traditional content management system only manages content for the website. It's a single channel. It also renders the actual public-facing website, i.e. the head, right? That's one of the things that people often think it's something from Sleepy Hollow, but the website, that public-facing website, that's the head. So content, presentation, and code all tightly coupled together. The headless CMS, on the other hand, does not render the website. And the headless CMS has two main jobs. One, to store and manage content, and two, to deliver that content via an API to all of your digital channels. So why does that matter, right? Because users they're not just coming through your front door anymore. I think that's a term that should probably go to the wastebasket. They're consuming your content across many channels, like other websites, apps, intranets, search tools, wearables, maybe kiosks, or even AI. And that makes Headless ideal for a multi-channel environment. So you update the content once and you publish everywhere. So traditional platform vendors like Adobe, Sitecore, Kentico, they've all been feeling the pressure from Headless and have actually added Headless as a feature to their platforms, making them sort of a hybrid of traditional and Headless. So we're going to call those hybrid CMS. So all of these approaches and things work together to form the mock design principles behind modern enterprise technology. So the microservices are those separate and composable pieces of business functionality we talked about. API first means it's built with APIs from the ground up and plays nice with other tech. Cloud native tech refers to software as a service that runs in the cloud, allowing it to scale on demand, right, which is important if you're growing, and automatically update without manual effort. And headless is what I just went over. So in a nutshell, mock means that your tech will be more adaptable and future-proof. And if you want to up the geek level even more, go to mockalliance.org. They've got a manifesto and everything, and it's a great way to learn more about that movement to make future-proof tech. So with all that in mind, so how do you find the right tech for your organization? So we've actually spent time with Steve and his team going through a platform evaluation process as part of their road mapping. It's really important to do that. If you're considering a platform or change, this is a process you'll want to take some time for, as the wrong platform and software partnership can definitely cost you in the short and long run. So first, you perform a needs analysis based on features and functions, business objectives, and other requirements. You write it all down, hopes, dreams, and all the nice to haves. And then you come together as a team and you get real, right? Create a prioritized list of must-haves that are going to help you find the best fit. It's important at this stage to align on whether you're thinking traditional or headless or hybrid CMS, as it will definitely impact what comes next. Next, you want to find out what the market experts like G2, Gartner, and Forrester say. What's the platform's track record? Does it have a good roadmap for the future? And does it align with those mock principles? And based on your priorities and those market insights, you narrow your options down to a good short list. Get on the phone with your shortlist candidates and ask them tough questions. Get a good demo. And you'll also want to vet the software vendors themselves, not just the platform. Are these people going to provide good support? Will they be around in 5 years? And lastly, if you want to take it a step further, you can also give the platforms a test drive and do some prototyping. Sometimes you can install demo versions or play around. And it's a great way to really kick the tires. So, Steve, what are your thoughts?
Well, some pretty geeky stuff, Ben. But I'm a bit of a geek, and so everything you've been just talking about there has been in the back of my mind for a while now. I've been in the web development space for close to 20 years now, and this composable approach that Ben just described as the biggest shift in web technology that I've seen since the monolithic content management systems began to dominate the web in the early 2000s. So I think we've realized that we really have to start planning for this shift now. As you can see from this matrix that Ben's CTO and I collaborated on, we've already started that work, and several different platforms are under consideration, as you can see there on the right. We're considering Kenneco's new hybrid CMS, as well as headless options with content.ai, Contentful, and Storyblock. There's a lot of factors to consider here, a lot of decisions to make, and choices have to be the right fit for the organization. It's overwhelming, but it's exciting too. Technology is evolving and opening new doors, new ways to reach our patients and consumers in this age of digital transformation that our industry is going through. But just like our continuous improvement projects, we have to have a plan and a process to get there. So Ben, I'm going to hand it back to you to tell us more about that.
All right. So we're getting close to the end here, and I want to leave you with 3 things that will help you better plan for the future. The first is digital road mapping. So health systems are generally good at mapping out priorities for a given year because it's tied to your budget process, right? What do we need? What do we have the budget for? And that's sort of your horizon, right? Quarterly and annual. But where they often fail is planning for longer term transformational things, like what Steve's talking about, shifting your technology stack. So one lesson I'd want you all to consider is to create a 3-year vision and then a roadmap that'll take you step by step to achieve that vision, help you get there. One key element of that is the 70-20-10 rule. And it's a way to balance your priorities over that time. So 70% of the roadmap should be your must-haves. These are the known projects that keep the lights on, right? Don't want to rock the boat too much. 20% are your needle movers. These are the things that your competitors are likely already doing and likely to generate some ROI. So it's a good investment. And the 10%, these are the big shifts. This is the blue sky kind of stuff. And really, these are the things that often get deprioritized, right? Or just don't have time for them. And that's because we spend all our time in those, when you think about the 4 quadrants, we spend all our time in that urgent and important quadrant, and we rarely get to the important but not urgent things. And we really have to spend the time to plan for those and prioritize them in our quarterly and certainly our annual time spent. So that's the 10%. Don't forget about it. So the second thing I want you to think about is digital ethnography. The best strategies and roadmaps must be aligned with the changing needs of consumers. Data is important. It's important to understanding user behavior, but mostly it's based on assumptions, and you interpret that data, right? And it's ultimately a lag metric we're looking at in the rearview mirror. So if you want to actually know what consumers are thinking about in real time, consider digital ethnography, which brings behavioral science to the online space. Think of it as it's social listening with an ethnographic lens across numerous digital channels where your audiences are actually engaging and hanging out. The best way to think about it is Jane Goodall. You will learn more about humans when they are not prompted, right? Surveys, when you ask somebody a survey or you ask them, it's prompted. They're going to answer a little differently. Just like if you're familiar with the Net Promoter Score survey, it's not enough to know if they would refer you. Digital ethnography shows have they referred you. It can be a real game changer. And in Lee Health's case, we're going to be partnering with Dean Brow of Feedback. You can go to find out about them at discoverfeedback.com. And we're going to include digital ethnography reports with our quarterly audits so that consumers can have a seat at the table when we are planning and making decisions. So the last idea I want to leave you with is this, that it's not enough to evolve your website. Your team has to evolve as well. So in the long runs, websites won't perform until their team does. And what you see here on the page is a digital governance maturity continuum. That's a mouthful, say that fast. And what it does is maps the typical levels of function or dysfunction in some cases. Steve, how has your team evolved over this continuum?
Yeah, so earlier when I was talking about the foundation, I mentioned needing the right team. And I cannot emphasize that enough. Everything we've shared here today are critical factors for success, but it all starts with the right people in the right roles and the organizational support to execute on it. Now, when I joined Lee Health, we were definitely somewhere around that first star. Our entire web team, content management, digital marketing, product development, it was like 2 or 3 of us. And I wore all of those hats, right? And believe me, it felt like chaos those first couple of years. But we've grown so much since then in terms of size and expertise and organizational support that I definitely say that we're much closer to that ideal responsive state than we were when I first started. It hasn't been easy. There's been plenty of ups and downs along the way, but it's been a really cool journey that was, well worth taking.
Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing your journey with us, Steve. Any final words of wisdom?
Yeah, I think just kind of, sum it all up. I think 3 words really do that well. People, process, product. I think if you get those first 2 right, you're gonna nail the third. Thank you.
Amen, one woman. Sling that lasso of truth.
Thanks.
Yeah. Well, so for those of you who were playing along, this is your movie answer cheat sheet. You can pause the video and and see how many you got right. When we did this presentation in Vegas, I think the most was maybe about 13 or 14. So, we got through a few challenging ones in there, but anyway, we're having a little fun. So, anyway, normally we would open up for questions, but here's our contact information. If you'd like to reach out to Steve or myself for any follow-up questions or just nerd out with us or share your favorite movies, feel free to reach us on via email or websites or on LinkedIn. So thank you so much, Steve, for joining. And it's nice that this time we don't have to fly back home.
Thanks for having me, Ben. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Take care.